Hi, my name doesn't matter much anymore. Not after what they did. It was Thanksgiving. We just sat down for dinner. Family all around, smiles, toasts. Everything felt normal. But then my hands started shaking. My vision blurred. And my wife? She leaned in so gently and said, "Sweetheart, I think you're just tired. Let's get you to the hospital." I trusted her. I trusted them all. But a few minutes later, on a deserted road, she stopped the car, turned to me, smiling, and whispered, "I put the poison in your food. You have 30 minutes. Get out." That was the plan. Not to kill me, just to make me disappear while they took over everything I built. 207 million, and I was supposed to vanish without a sound. But I didn't, because 5 black SUVs appeared out of nowhere. And that's when everything changed. Or maybe that's when it truly began. Thanksgiving at the Jacobs house always looked like something out of a magazine. Gold-rimmed china, napkins folded into precise triangles. The scent of cinnamon-glazed yams and honey-basted ham clung to the air like a second skin. Laughter echoed from the kitchen, silverware clinked softly, and the hum of old Motown tunes floated from the record player like background noise to a life that looked perfect on the outside. I took my usual seat at the far end of the table, where the light from the chandelier didn't quite reach. It had become something of a joke, my spot. Right near the buffet, out of the way, close to the kitchen in case something broke, ran out, or needed fixing. I'd always tell myself it was fine, convenient. I was close to the action, right? Useful. That's what they called me. "Can you check the circuit breaker?" someone would say. "Think you can carve the turkey? Nate always does it best." My brother-in-law Alan would chime in with that smug half-smile. And I did. Always did. Quietly. Efficiently. No one had to ask twice. This year was no different. The room felt warm, not just from the oven's heat, but the collective familiarity of it all. The same stories. Same jokes. Same clinking glasses raised in gratitude. Except tonight, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was a thin layer of distance in the air, like a silent agreement had been made that I wasn't a part of. We were halfway through dinner when the speeches started. "Let's take a moment," my mother-in-law Susan announced, raising her glass. "To family. To another beautiful year of togetherness. And to each of you who make this home whole." They went around the table, naming names. Her daughter, my wife, was praised for organizing everything. Her eldest son was thanked for bringing the wine. Her younger daughter, for those adorable place cards. Even Alan, who showed up late and empty-handed, got a shout-out for just being Alan. Then silence, and a nod toward my end of the table. And of course, to everyone else who made tonight possible. I smiled, nodded. I even raised my glass. "That's fine," I told myself. "I don't need to be mentioned. I'm not here for the recognition." Still, that old feeling crept up. The one where you know you're present but not really seen. Like background music at a dinner party. I shifted in my seat. The heat that had felt cozy a moment ago suddenly seemed suffocating. A bead of sweat slid down the back of my neck. My fork hovered halfway to my mouth as a wave of cold washed over me, following the heat. Weird. Maybe too much wine. Or not enough water. I blinked, adjusted my collar, and tried to focus on the mashed potatoes on my plate. "Sweetheart." My wife's voice broke through the noise like a lullaby, soft and oddly timed. "Are you okay?" Everyone turned toward me, brows furrowed, eyes wide. "You look pale." Alan added. You should probably get checked. Susan chimed in without missing a beat. Yes, maybe head to urgent care. It's probably nothing, but better safe than sorry. I can drive you, my wife said quickly, standing before I could respond. Come on, let's go before the pie's out. That way, you'll be back in no time. The room agreed in unison. No hesitation. No pause to let me decide. And I just stood up, smiled faintly. Sorry to ruin dessert, I mumbled. Probably just tired. I always chose peace over protest. I'd done it for years. De-escalate. Keep things easy. As I pushed my chair back, no one reached for me. No one insisted I sit down. The conversations resumed. A cousin leaned toward Alan to whisper a joke. Laughter rose from the other end of the table like I hadn't even left. On the way out, I glanced back one last time. My plate remained unfinished. My name never mentioned, my seat already forgotten. I remember thinking, as I stepped away from the table, that I was finally being taken care of. I closed the passenger door gently behind me. The chill of the night bit at the back of my neck as the car rolled down the driveway. The warmth of the house still clung faintly to my skin, but already felt miles away. My wife kept her eyes on the road. Her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, fingers tapping to a rhythm only she could hear. The hum of the tires was steady, the kind of background noise you don't notice unless you're trying not to speak. Streetlights flickered past like metronome ticks, each one pulling us further from the familiar. I told myself the silence was just comfort. After all, we'd been married nearly 12 years. Silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was practiced, efficient, like everything else in this family. I shifted slightly in my seat, adjusting my posture as the discomfort in my stomach turned to a dull throb. Not stabbing, not urgent, just wrong, offbeat. I'm glad you said something, she murmured, eyes still forward. You didn't look good back there. I nodded slowly. Yeah, maybe just stress. It's been a long week. She smiled faintly. Or maybe you're finally getting old. I chuckled weakly. Took you this long to notice? The smile stayed, but she didn't laugh. The kind of smile you wear when you've already moved on in your head. I looked out the window again, half focused on the street signs. Maple, then Windsor, then Grant. My brain registered the route with a small delay until it didn't. My eyebrows pinched together. Wait, aren't we supposed to turn on Fairview to get to St. Luke's? She didn't hesitate. They've been repaving it all week. Huge detour. Too smooth, too fast, like she'd rehearsed it. I let that slide. Maybe she was right. I hadn't driven that way in a while. Still, my gut twisted tighter. I shifted again, this time slower. My legs were heavier now. Not numb, just reluctant. Like my body was trying to sink into itself. I glanced at my phone resting on my lap. Battery blinking red. Of course, I didn't plug it in. I didn't move. Instead, I watched the houses start to thin out. Lawns faded into gravel. Porch lights gave way to empty lots and quiet intersections. We passed a gas station that was long since closed for the night. Are we still headed to St. Luke's? My voice wasn't accusing, just checking. She didn't answer at first. Then, we're almost there. Almost where? That phrase stuck to the roof of my mouth like honey turned sour. I blinked harder this time, trying to shake the fog. Every inhale felt shorter, shallower, but my brain, it was more alert now than it had been all week. I started noticing things I wouldn't have cared about 10 minutes earlier. How the speed limit signs disappeared, how there were no other cars. How even the birds seemed to be missing from the trees lining this desolate road. She slowed down. The car eased into a stop by the side of the road where the asphalt ended and dirt took over. No lights, no buildings, just quiet. The engine purred in neutral. I turned toward her slowly. My neck fought me, but I forced it. My eyes found her profile, the curve of her nose, the purse of her lips, the calm in her expression like she'd done this before. And then she turned, smiling, not triumphant, not wicked, just peaceful. Her voice was level, unshaken. I put something in your food tonight. I didn't react, not yet. You've got maybe 30 minutes left, probably less, judging by your breathing. Still, I didn't speak. It's not to kill you, she said softly. Just enough to stop you. We needed you quiet. You've been asking too many questions. We. That word was the dagger. They didn't want it this way, she added, but I told them it was the cleanest. You'd trust me. You always have. I looked at her again. Really looked. This wasn't rage. This wasn't an emotional snap. This was planned. This was handled. My fingers twitched weakly, but I didn't reach for the door yet. No yelling, no begging, no accusations. I just sat there, listening to the hum of the engine and the truth that didn't echo. It settled between us like thick fog, unmoving, choking, absolute. She turned forward again, both hands back on the wheel. They didn't want you dead, she repeated, just unable to stop what came next. The words stayed with me after she turned forward again, not echoing, not ringing. They sat there, steady and intact, like instructions written on the inside of my skull. I wasn't dying. I was being managed. That difference mattered more than fear ever could. I replayed what she'd said, piece by piece, the way I used to break down contracts when something felt off. She hadn't spoken in anger. There was no trembling in her voice, no rush. She'd mentioned timing without guessing, dosage without hesitation. 30 minutes wasn't a threat. It was a schedule. This wasn't about losing control in a marriage. It was about taking it. My chest felt tight, but my mind was oddly clear. I tested that clarity the only way I could. I flexed my fingers against the seat. They responded slowly, like an old engine turning over in cold weather. I shifted my right leg. It moved, but not with confidence. My left followed, heavier, delayed. I noted all of it, quietly, without comment. You're breathing shallow, she said, still facing the road. Try not to fight it. I didn't answer, not because I couldn't, but because I was choosing when to speak. Words cost energy now. I wasn't going to waste them. What happens next, she continued, depends on how cooperative you are. There it was, the real conversation. She explained it the way someone explains a process they've walked through already. Doctors would be involved, assessments, observations. Nothing dramatic, nothing illegal. Temporary authority granted while things were clarified. For your own good, she said, as if testing the phrase out loud. I'd heard that sentence my whole life, from managers who wanted overtime without pay, from relatives who wanted silence instead of truth. It always showed up right before something was taken. You'll be alive, she added. Confused, maybe, but safe. Safe. That word almost made me smile. I understood then what death would have ruined. Death brings questions. Death draws lines. Death forces explanations. Survival keeps everything flexible. They didn't need me gone. They needed me present, but unreliable. A man who couldn't quite remember. A husband whose judgment was questionable. A signature that could be challenged, a voice that could be dismissed. I shifted again, carefully. My balance was off now. When I tried to straighten, the world tilted just enough to remind me who was in charge. She reached over and opened my door. The sound was too loud in the stillness. Hinges creaked. Cool air rushed in, sharp against my skin. "Go ahead," she said. "This is where you stop. Not goodbye. Not I'm leaving you. This is where you stop." I let that sink in as I swung my legs out of the car. My feet touched gravel, unsteady. I used the door frame to lower myself. Every movement deliberate, like I was learning my body all over again. She waited, patient, watching. I sat down on the edge of the road, the ground, colder than I expected. The car idled for a moment longer. I heard her seatbelt click. The turn signal flashed once, unnecessary out here. Then the engine revved. Headlights swept across me briefly, white and unforgiving, before disappearing down the road. The sound faded until there was nothing left but wind moving through weeds and the slow ticking of my own pulse. I didn't chase the car. I couldn't have if I wanted to. Instead, I leaned back slightly and focused on staying upright. Breaths in, breaths out, not counting minutes, counting control, what little of it I had left. The night pressed in, but my thoughts stayed sharp. They hadn't underestimated my body. They'd underestimated my silence. I understood then that surviving wouldn't save me. Silence would destroy me. The sound of the car faded, not in a rush, but like it was being lowered by hand. 1 second, I could still feel the tremble of the tires, and the next, nothing. Just me, the open stretch of road, and the night thick around my ears. The silence wasn't natural. It felt rehearsed. A stage set, too perfectly quiet. No bugs, no breeze. Just the distant, dull tick of my own heart and the weight of gravel biting through my clothes. I didn't move at first. There was no one to perform for. I looked down at my palms, scratched, a little dirty. Not bleeding, but marked just enough to remind me I'd been handled. I brushed them off without real urgency, then rested them on my knees, grounding myself. My body was unsteady, but my mind had never been more focused. I kept replaying her words, not just what she said, but how. Not a single word wasted, not a moment of second guessing. No yelling, no cruelty, just precision. Like someone closing a tab on a browser. Clean, unemotional, final. This is where you stop. There was no anger behind it, no regret. Just the kind of decision people make when they've already moved on, and they're just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. I'd heard people at work use that same tone when they let someone go. Corporate mercy, sanitized brutality. I rubbed my arms against the cold, which had started to creep in more sharply now. Every breath took a little longer to settle. Every second dragged with the kind of slowness you only feel when time starts to matter again. I checked my watch. 7 minutes since she'd left. I made myself stop counting right then. Time wasn't my enemy. Panic was. If I was going to stay conscious, I had to control the story. Not let it run away from me. That's when I felt it. Not just in my bones, but in my gut. Those 30 minutes she mentioned, they weren't just about the drug. They were about the window, the legal one, the reputational one, the gap between a man being left behind and the world agreeing he belonged there. 30 minutes of erasure. A lot can happen in half an hour if no one interrupts it. She wasn't trying to kill me. She was making space. Enough space to rewrite who I was by the time anyone asked. He's confused, they'd say. He's not well. He's been under a lot of stress. We were trying to help. That phrase again. Always the same net. Always the same trap. I reached into my coat pocket, moving slowly, deliberately, like someone pretending to check for loose change. My phone was there, but it was warm, already draining battery faster than usual. I lit up the screen. 11%. No bars. I stared at the signal for a second, then turned it off. I couldn't afford to waste energy calling the wrong person. No one picked up unknown numbers anymore. Not without a text first. And if the battery went before I reached someone real, I'd lose more than just the call. I'd lose clarity. I closed my eyes and breathed, thought about who I could trust, really trust, not just to pick up, but to listen, to believe. And in the stillness, my mind wandered backwards to birthdays where I didn't blow out the candles because someone else already had, to arguments settled before I walked into the room, to meetings with her family where decisions had already been made, always with that same tone. We just thought it was better this way. Better for who? I'd told myself for years that being the easy one was a strength, that staying calm, staying useful, made me part of the team. But the truth was, they never needed me to be calm. They needed me to be quiet, predictable, cooperative. Erasure doesn't happen all at once. It's death by 1,000 small assumptions, 1,000 silences. And now, I had about 20 minutes left before whatever came next. I held the phone again, still off, still warm. I considered turning it back on, but something made me wait. Not yet. This wasn't about being rescued. This was about interrupting the plan. I looked out into the dark, no streetlights, no signs, just the stretch of road ahead, still empty. The night pressed closer, heavier than before. Then, headlights, far off, too far to identify, but moving. I didn't react right away. I watched them grow from dots into beams. They weren't swerving, they weren't slowing, but they were coming. And I knew as they lit up the gravel in front of me that they weren't hers, and they weren't accidents. The lights cut through the dark like a blade. I didn't move, partly from instinct, partly because I wanted to see who thought I was worth finding. 5 black SUVs rolled to a stop in perfect rhythm, tires crunching over gravel with no urgency, no screech. The engine stayed on, humming low, steady. No one shouted. No one ran. Doors opened in sequence, front to back, left to right, as if they'd practiced the maneuver a dozen times. The last one to step out was a man in his 50s, clean cut, no uniform, just a gray wool coat and a calm expression. He looked at me, not through me, and said my name. Once, perfect pronunciation, no hesitation. Mr. Keene. I nodded. That's all I could manage, but it was enough. He didn't ask how I ended up here or why I looked like I'd lost a fight with a memory foam mattress. He just tilted his head slightly, as if to ask, "Can you stand?" I tried. My legs wobbled like undercooked pasta, but I was upright. Barely. He didn't rush to help. That mattered. One of the others handed him a folded blanket. Another held a bottle of water without unscrewing the cap. They weren't here to coddle me. They were here because someone knew I might not make it home on my own. Inside the SUV, the heat was set to low. No questions, no whispers. I eased into the seat, wrapping the blanket around my shoulders more for the symbolism than the warmth. I wasn't cold anymore. I was alert. We pulled away from the roadside with the same measured calm they'd arrived with. No speeding, no evasive moves, just silence, thick, but not uncomfortable. It took me 2 full minutes to speak. "Do you have a phone charger?" The man in the gray coat reached into the console and handed one over. No commentary, just action. I plugged it in, letting the battery crawl back up, 1% at a time. "I'm not calling anyone," I said, more to myself than to them. "Not yet." He nodded once, like that made sense. They offered water again. I took a sip. They offered a protein bar. I passed. Then, finally, I asked, "How long do I have before the paperwork starts?" That was the only thing that mattered now. He answered without a beat of delay. "They'll assume you're missing by sunrise. Medical records will be drafted within 12 hours. Mental health concerns will be noted. Once those are filed, it gets harder." That was enough. I looked out the tinted window and let the road blur. Whoever these people were, they weren't just lucky passers-by. They didn't stumble onto me by chance. This had been arranged by someone who didn't want me erased. Still, I made a decision before we reached the highway. Don't contact my wife or her family. The man in the coat didn't ask why. He just tapped once on a phone he hadn't shown me until now and gave a single nod to the driver. I knew what I was saying wasn't born from fear. It was calculation. If I moved too soon, she'd spin the narrative first. If I accused without proof, they'd play the victim. I needed to wait, not to heal, but to sharpen. Let them believe they'd succeeded. Let them settle into the comfort of winning. Silence was no longer the enemy. It was the shield. I thought about how quickly people lie when they think no one's watching, about how easy it was for a whole family to agree I was better off resting. Every Thanksgiving toast, every polite smile, every sidelong glance had built this. And now, I finally saw it for what it was. A structure, not made of hate, but convenience. And I had been convenient until I wasn't. As the SUV turned onto an access road, one of the passengers offered me a fresh towel and a small first aid kit. I didn't need either, but I accepted them out of respect. I dabbed at the dried sweat on my neck, then leaned back, eyes open. The plan wasn't formed yet, but the silence would buy me time. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't run to a lawyer or the press. I'd let her think I was still lying there, shivering, waiting to be saved. I'd let them all believe I was still exactly where they'd left me. The ride to the facility had been quiet. Almost too quiet. No radio, no idle chat. Just the gentle hum of the tires meeting the road and the occasional turn signal breaking the rhythm. They knew better than to fill the air with words I hadn't asked for. We arrived just before dawn. The building didn't look like a hospital. More like a reimagined private lodge. Muted beige walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, polished floors that reflected overhead lights like a lake without ripples. They wheeled me in without fanfare. No white coats rushing. No questions shouted across corridors. Everyone moved with that eerie precision I'd come to recognize. They weren't strangers to plans made quietly. Once inside, they transferred me to a private room. No roommate, no flowers, no waiting area full of coughing strangers. Just me, a nurse named Diana who didn't make small talk, and a soft leather chair across from the bed that remained empty for hours. I was lucid. That much was clear. I could answer questions, recall events, quote my social security number backward if they asked me to. I noticed things, who walked past the open door and who didn't. I saw which medical forms were signed and which remained in draft. And more importantly, I knew who hadn't visited. No wife, no family, not a single concerned in-law offering warm soup or cold apologies. Around 9 a.m., a physician I'd never seen before came in with a clipboard and a mouth full of careful words. "You're stable," he said. "Vitals are consistent. Lab work shows improvement." Then came the second sentence, the one meant to sound like reassurance, but smelled like strategy. "Your wife informed us of some disorientation prior to your arrival." Disorientation. That's the word she'd used in the car, too. just before she left me on the side of the road like a broken appliance. I didn't react, not outwardly. Inside, though, I felt it settle. The confirmation. She was already rewriting the story before mine had even made it to paper. And they were going to help her do it. The doctor offered a thin smile, then stepped aside as a woman in a navy suit entered the room. Her tone was warm. Her hands held a single folder. "Mr. Keene," she said, "we're here to support you. Your wife has signed a temporary delegation of care. It's only meant to ensure that while you're recovering, decisions aren't delayed. Purely procedural." She placed the folder on the table beside the bed like it was a gift, not a trap. Then she said the words that sealed the tone of the whole morning. "It's for your own good." There it was, the same phrase, as if they'd passed it around in emails or whispered it in hallways. I wondered how many times that sentence had been used to shut down dissent, in boardrooms, in bedrooms, at family dinners. I looked down at the folder. It was thick with assumption. "Can I read it?" I asked, already flipping through. "Of course," she replied, overly smooth. "We want full transparency." That was the lie that stung the most, not the manipulation itself, but the confidence they had in its success. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I just read. Page after page used language dipped in honey: stability, recovery, authorized temporary care directives. No mention of the roadside. No mention of my ability to speak, walk, think. Just a narrative scaffold they'd hoped I'd accept. I asked a few questions, nothing dramatic. How long the order would last, who had power of attorney, what criteria they'd use to justify the medical hold. The answers were tidy, practiced, but underneath I could feel it. They'd never expected me to be asking them. Just after noon, the door opened again. This time, it was my attorney. He walked in like he owned the air between the walls, carrying a black briefcase and zero patience for pleasantries. "David," he said, "you look better than I expected." "I feel worse than I should." He set his case down, clicked it open, and pulled out a manila envelope I hadn't seen in 5 years. "Do you remember the contingency clauses we added after the stroke scare?" he asked. I nodded. He slid a document toward me. "They thought they could fast-track you into legal silence. They forgot you prepared for that." I read quickly. 3 pages. Clean. Airtight. If I were declared mentally unfit without corroborating psychological examination from a neutral third-party source, triggered automatically, my wife would lose temporary authority. They hadn't read the fine print. Or they had, and assumed I never would again. The lawyer stayed silent as I signed. Not the medical form. The contract they forgot I still controlled. They thought panic would cloud my thinking. That betrayal would make me reactive. But it didn't. It clarified everything. Their whole plan depended on emotion, on me getting loud, getting messy, flailing my way into a padded corner. But silence? Silence was a foreign language to them, and I spoke it fluently now. I leaned back in the bed. "They still think I'm sedated," I said. My attorney smiled faintly. "Then let them." The real power wasn't in showing them what I knew. It was in choosing when. So I let the folder stay where it was, untouched. I didn't rip it in two or shove it across the table. I simply picked up the pen, paused, and signed a form of my own. Not surrender, strategy. They thought I was signing my way out of the room. What I was really doing was choosing where to meet them next, and I chose a room they couldn't control. Late that same morning, I stepped out of the car and into a tall glass building downtown. No logos on the entrance, just polished doors, and a uniformed attendant who held them open with a nod. This wasn't a courthouse or a hospital. It was something quieter, cleaner, a legal conference center built for boardroom wars disguised as meetings. I'd left the medical facility less than 2 hours earlier, checked out under my own name, wearing my own clothes. The paperwork hadn't caught up to me yet. I planned to keep it that way. Inside, the receptionist knew my name before I said it. She guided me to the 12th floor where a long hallway led to a room with double doors already cracked open. I didn't push them fully open. I waited. I needed the pause, a breath before the shift. Then I entered. No one stood to greet me. No one offered coffee. The room was rectangular, cold in its professionalism. A mahogany table ran its length, surrounded by high-backed chairs too stiff to be comfortable. The blinds were partially drawn, casting long stripes of morning light across the rug. Every chair was filled, every face familiar, some too familiar. My wife sat at the far end, her hands folded like she was praying. Next to her, her sister tapped an uncapped pen on a legal pad, eyes darting. 2 attorneys, one from their side, one neutral, maybe. A family friend, Gary, who once helped us buy our second house. All of them playing their roles, and none of them expected me to walk in without an escort. I didn't say a word. I took my seat at the near end, facing the door. I wanted a clear exit. Not because I planned to run, but because I wanted them to wonder if I would. I spent the first few minutes reading the room. Who avoided my eyes? Who met them too quickly? My wife didn't look up. Her sister looked everywhere but at me. Gary, oddly, gave me a nod. Nothing more. The attorney on my left, a woman named McIntyre, leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "Just observe for now. Let them lead." I did. The opposing attorney began first. "We've called this meeting today to assess next steps, given recent developments regarding Mr. Keene's well-being." Well-being. Another euphemism. Another shield. I let it pass. Then the door clicked open again, and the temperature in the room changed. A woman stepped in, mid-50s, gray hair in a tight bun. No smile. She clutched a folder to her chest like it contained something she hadn't planned to share. "This is Dr. Celia Rourke," McIntyre announced before anyone else could. "She's not on the agenda," my wife's attorney interrupted. "She doesn't need to be," McIntyre replied. "She's not speaking on behalf of anyone. She's speaking because she was there." I knew the name. Dr. Rourke had signed the intake paperwork at the facility last night. Her job was to process medical holds, quiet ones. She wasn't part of any rescue team. She wasn't one of mine. She was, until now, one of theirs. She sat down slowly. When prompted, she spoke only one sentence at first. I was told he was disoriented and potentially delusional. She let the words hang, then added, "But he wasn't. Not by any professional standard." That was the crack. Not a confession, not a declaration. Just a fact dropped into the center of a room built on suggestion. The air shifted. A pen stopped tapping. I opened my folder then. No dramatics, no theatrics. I read dates, times, medical notes. I cited language used in emails and family group chats. I laid out a map, small pieces, no conclusions. I let the silence carry what I didn't say out loud. Then I turned to Dr. Rourke. "Do any of these notes reflect the person you evaluated?" She paused, then shook her head once. "That's all I needed," I said. The opposing counsel straightened his back. My wife's posture changed. She realized this wasn't a negotiation, it was a recording. I didn't accuse anyone. I asked questions, direct, clear, inescapable. Who initiated the psychiatric hold paperwork? A pause. Was there an official diagnosis prior to the report? Another pause. Did anyone suggest to medical personnel that I was suicidal? Silence, and that silence spoke. Then it happened. Gary, the friend, leaned forward. I think there was some misunderstanding, he said too quickly. What misunderstanding? I asked calmly. He opened his mouth, then stopped, then corrected, I mean, I wasn't directly involved. Too fast, too messy. Every face in the room shifted slightly. They all saw it. The control was gone. That was when they realized the room no longer belonged to them. And that's when they struck back, harder than I expected. The room had barely settled from Gary's slip when the opposing counsel smoothly slid a manila folder across the table toward McIntyre, my attorney. No preamble, no raised voice, just a quiet, confident gesture. We've received new documentation this morning, he said, turning toward me with a calm, rehearsed expression. A psychological evaluation submitted anonymously but professionally formatted. It raises significant concerns regarding Mr. Keene's recent behavior and long-term decision-making capacity. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. The shift was immediate. My wife didn't flinch. That's how I knew she'd known. Her sister leaned forward slightly, pretending to be surprised, but too precisely. Even Gary's eyebrows rose at the exact performative angle you'd expect from someone who got the memo late but read the part about act concerned. McIntyre opened the folder slowly. I saw her jaw tighten. Are we expected to treat this as admissible material? She asked, her voice still steady. Not admissible, the attorney said. Informative. It may guide decisions. Moving forward. Informative. Another euphemism for poisoning the well. He kept going. The report references episodes of paranoia, delusional tendencies, compulsive documentation behaviors, an inability to distinguish perceived betrayal from actual threat. He paused, then delivered the killing line. It suggests Mr. Keene may not be in full control of his faculties, and that others in his family have long suspected as much. There it was, the counterstrike, and I felt the room shift. Not dramatically, just enough to register. 2 sets of eyes darted to the floor. A third looked past me, as if already preparing an apology they might need later. The same people who hadn't challenged my version of events minutes earlier now found themselves unsure, uncomfortable. Doubt doesn't need evidence. It only needs room to grow. And in that moment, they gave it room. I sat perfectly still. No sigh, no shake of the head, nothing they could pin on me emotionally. But inside, something scraped, because they'd planned this. They'd timed it to hit right after I had revealed truth, but before that truth had time to settle. McIntyre leaned toward me slightly and whispered, "We can recess if needed." I shook my head once. No. Then I closed my folder, placed both hands flat on the table, and looked directly at my wife. Her eyes didn't flinch, but they didn't meet mine either. I paused, long enough for silence to become its own strategy, long enough to remind everyone that I wasn't panicking, wasn't unraveling. Then I adjusted, not emotionally, strategically. I reached into my briefcase, slowly, no dramatics. I pulled out a small packet of paper and a USB drive. "I'd like to introduce a piece of context," I said. No one stopped me. I handed the papers to McIntyre, who immediately recognized the format: notarized timestamps, email chains, and one letter, dated 6 months prior, signed by my wife. It was a letter requesting early evaluation for herself, citing stress, insomnia, and trouble separating personal frustrations from external threats. It included a professional recommendation for individual counseling, which she had refused. McIntyre passed the documents across the table. The attorney on the other side didn't touch them right away. Then I spoke. Just one more sentence. The USB contains a recording from last week. It captures a conversation between my wife and her sister, discussing how to frame a breakdown without actually causing one. Her exact words were, "He just needs to look unstable long enough." The room froze. Not in outrage, in adjustment. You could feel the recalibration happening in real time, minds pulling back from their brief lean into doubt, some looking at my wife, others avoiding her entirely now. She didn't defend herself. That was her tactic. Silence as shield. But the shield cracked, because this wasn't private anymore. This was public space, and public space demands response. McIntyre didn't speak either. She didn't need to. The timeline was clear. Her signature from last spring contradicted the concern she'd raised in today's report. The contradiction wasn't subtle. It was structural, intentional. By the time I laid out the email trail, backed by metadata showing she'd begun contacting psychiatric facilities before the alleged incident, the narrative was flipped. Not with fury, not with accusation, just logic. And silence did the rest. The lawyer on their side shifted uneasily. He cleared his throat. "We may need to reevaluate the scope of this meeting." I nodded. I'd agree. But before anyone could suggest another delay, McIntyre leaned forward and said, "Given the inconsistencies presented, I'm formally requesting that all temporary medical and legal measures imposed on Mr. Keene be suspended, effective immediately." The neutral party in the room, a corporate-appointed facilitator, finally spoke. "I believe that's reasonable, pending full review. Effective now." That was the price of control. It doesn't just cost the victim, it bankrupts the manipulator when exposed. My wife didn't respond. Her attorney packed papers mechanically. The power they'd wielded so easily just hours before had evaporated. And then, the room was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't weaponized. It was settled. There was one final chair at the head of the table, unoccupied. Someone gestured for me to take it. I didn't. That chair had been the prize, the symbol of who won the argument. But I wasn't interested in taking up the space they'd fought so hard to control. I didn't need the chair. I stood up before anyone could ask me to stay. Walking away was the only decision left that was truly mine. The heavy glass doors whispered shut behind me, sealing the conference room and everything it had meant. I stepped into the late afternoon light. The sun had started its descent, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. The breeze was cool, not cold, but I felt it settle against my skin like something earned, like truth finally exhaled. I paused on the curb. My phone vibrated once, twice, then went silent. I didn't reach for it. Not yet. For a few minutes I just stood there. Not as a target, not as a case file, not even as a husband. Just a man who'd told the truth in a room built to ignore it. And now, outside the sterile choreography of lawyers and carefully arranged chairs, I let myself breathe. Really breathe. A car pulled up. Not the black SUVs this time, just a neutral rideshare. I got in without a word and leaned my head back, eyes closed, not sleeping, not thinking, just absorbing. Every part of my body felt like it had run a marathon underwater, exhausted but somehow cleansed. No applause followed, no justice marching in with handcuffs, just paperwork, process, and a few quiet acknowledgments that things would be reviewed further. That was how these things happened in real life. Not with fireworks, but with quiet shifts behind closed doors. By the time I reached home, or the place that used to feel like home, the sun was low. The porch light flickered on automatically, a small, familiar detail that somehow made the silence feel more personal. I stepped inside. Same hallway, same furniture, but everything felt less claimed. There were no voices behind the kitchen door. No faint echo of my name tossed casually between family members. Just stillness. But unlike before, it wasn't suffocating. It was mine. I hung up my jacket, poured a glass of water, and sat at the edge of the couch. Not the center, just the edge. Old habit. Years of making room for others in every physical and emotional space. This time, there was no one else to accommodate. I turned the glass slowly in my hand and let the day settle into place. My lawyer had been clear. There would be investigations, quiet inquiries into the false reports, audits of financial accounts, maybe, eventually, statements on the record, but nothing immediate, nothing that looked like a win on TV. And that was fine. What mattered had already happened. Because even though the lies had been loud, I'd answered them without matching their volume. I'd stood in the same room with the people who tried to erase me and didn't disappear. That kind of strength doesn't need a verdict. Still, strength didn't erase the bruises, not the ones on paper, not the ones under the skin. I thought of my wife, her silence in that final moment. Not defiant, not regretful, just distant, like someone watching a chapter end that they never really read. And I knew we wouldn't talk again. Not really. There would be follow-up, emails, property divisions, some legal correspondence. But the part of us that once believed in each other, whatever it was, had been signed away in silence. Some losses don't need shouting. They just need time to stop pretending they were wins. I walked into the bedroom. Everything was still where I'd left it weeks ago, but I saw it differently now. The mess wasn't chaos. It was mine. The silence wasn't punishment. It was peace. And that Thanksgiving table, God, that table. I saw it now as clearly as if I were sitting there. That empty chair they left open, always with a passing joke, like, he's probably still working, or he gets weird around holidays. The truth? That chair was never for me. Not really. They never expected me to sit there. And I spent years trying to earn a seat at a table that was never mine to begin with. Today, I left that table, not in anger, not in revenge. I just walked away from the noise, the manipulation, the pretending. I left it behind. Because family isn't built from seating charts or shared last names. It's built from truth, from choice, from people who would rather hear your worst than pretend you're fine. I don't know what comes next. I don't have a neat ending. But I do know this. I won't spend another year proving my worth to people who only see what they can use. And if you've lived any part of this, any version where silence was expected, where love meant keeping your voice small, I want you to hear me now. You're not crazy. You're not dramatic. And you're definitely not alone. You don't have to sit at that table. You can leave. You can choose peace without asking permission. You can stop calling silence love. Because real love listens. And if it doesn't, it never was.